The mirror in apartment 13. Lena had just moved into apartment 13, a modest flat on the 10th floor of an aging high-rise in the heart of the city. The walls smelled faintly of paint and dust, and the air carried the lingering chill of winter. While unpacking boxes, she noticed an old mirror leaning against the corner of the living room. Its ornate frame was carved with delicate, twisting vines, tarnished and darkened with age. It seemed ordinary at first, yet the reflection it cast was slightly off, a shadow darker, an angle skewed as if it observed more than it should. The first night, Lena awoke to a faint creak. The mirror's surface rippled slightly, a distortion she dismissed as a trick of light or her imagination. But soon she noticed subtle differences, objects behind her in the reflection that did not exist in reality, movements that were not hers, and an impression of being watched. She touched the glass lightly, the chill bit her fingers. Something about it felt alive, almost sentient. A whisper seemed to echo from the reflective surface, faint and indecipherable, brushing against the edges of her mind. Days passed, and Lena began noticing changes in her surroundings. Shadows lingered longer than they should, corners of rooms seemed darker, more oppressive. The mirror appeared to intensify these distortions, capturing her attention even when she tried to avoid it. One evening, as she organized her kitchen, the reflection behind her moved independently, mimicking gestures she had not made. Lena spun around, nothing. Only the silent, dusty room. But the mirror had recorded the gesture perfectly, a pale imitation of reality, unnerving in its precision. Her sleep became restless. In dreams, she found herself staring into the mirror, but the apartment on the other side was subtly wrong. Walls cracked in impossible patterns, the furniture warped, shadows long and blackened. Figures moved in the distance, human-like but without clear features. They watched her with an intensity that made her heart pound, yet she could not turn away. Waking from these dreams left a residue of fear, a tightness in her chest, as if the mirror had reached through the veil of sleep to grip her. Neighbors had warned her about apartment 13, casually at first. Old building, one said, strange things happen. Nothing serious. But the vague warnings did little to prepare her for the growing sensation that she was not alone. The mirror seemed to feed on her attention, her presence, perhaps even her fear. Every glance, every accidental observation of the reflective surface left her more unsettled. The longer she stared, the more she felt the glass looking back, a subtle intelligence behind the distorted reflection, waiting. Then one night, Lena noticed a subtle shift. A second figure appeared behind her in the reflection. It was herself, yet not. The movements were delayed by a heartbeat, gestures slightly wrong, eyes wider, expression tense, almost pleading. Panic surged, but she forced herself to stay calm. Whatever lived within that mirror was not satisfied with passive observation. It wanted interaction. Lena realized, with a growing sense of horror, that this was only the beginning. The mirror's pull intensified with each passing hour. Objects moved slightly when unobserved, whispers edged into the silent rooms, and reflections showed scenes from her past she had never willingly recalled. Lena's life was slowly being measured against the mirror's own rules, each reflection a puzzle, each movement a test. By midnight, the air was thick, oppressive, and the mirror glowed faintly under the city lights as if alive. As she stepped closer, Lena's reflection smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that did not match her own. Her breath caught in her throat. The whispers coalesced into words she almost understood. Come. Step through. Stay. She stumbled back, heart racing, mind desperate for rationality, yet something deep within compelled her to look again. The mirror was no longer just glass. It was a threshold, an observer, and perhaps a trap, waiting patiently for the moment she could not resist. The following morning, Lena awoke to find the apartment eerily quiet. Sunlight filtered through dusty blinds, illuminating the familiar contours of her new home. Yet the mirror still dominated the living room corner, its dark frame almost pulsing with subtle energy. Tentatively she approached it, heart hammering. The reflection seemed normal at first, but a flicker caught her eye, her own image lagging slightly behind her movements, a delayed imitation that made her skin prickle. She stepped back instinctively, but the shadow of that other self seemed to linger, watching, waiting. Determined to rationalize the phenomenon, Lena began documenting what she saw. Every movement, every anomaly, every faint whisper she heard was meticulously noted. Yet the mirror seemed to adapt, revealing new distortions. Furniture slightly shifted, walls warped at angles that defied logic, and shadows that should not have existed. One night, she swore she saw the reflection of a chair slide silently across the room while she stood frozen in place. Panic gnawed at her resolve, but curiosity, twisted and insistent, compelled her to continue observing. Lena's dreams became increasingly vivid, often beginning with her standing before the mirror. Each time, the apartment in the reflection was subtly wrong. Ceilings bowed, light fell strangely, and shapes moved just at the periphery of her vision. Figures emerged, sometimes children, sometimes faceless adults, but always silent, always watching. They gestured toward her, beckoning, warning, or perhaps mocking. When she woke, the sensation lingered, as if the mirror had implanted a fragment of that alternate space into her consciousness. Days passed, and subtle changes crept into Lena's waking life. She began noticing reflections in other glass surfaces, the elevator doors, windows across the street, even her own polished kitchen appliances, that mimicked the mirror's distortions. The apartment itself felt alive, responsive, as if guided by the mirror's unseen intelligence. Whispers became more frequent, brushing against her thoughts. Step through, stay, look closer. Lena's pulse raced every time she caught sight of her own reflection. The mirror was no longer a passive object but an entity that demanded attention, feeding on her fear, her curiosity, and her anxiety. One evening, a shadow detached itself fully from the reflection. In the mirror, Lena saw herself standing in the room, but her posture was wrong, rigid, unnaturally still, eyes unblinking. The reflection raised a hand, then another, beckoning her toward the glass. Lena stumbled backward, tripping over a box, heart pounding. The apartment seemed to hold its breath. Then, slowly, the reflected figure stepped forward within the mirror's plane, closer to the glass than its supposed boundaries should allow. Lena realized with dawning terror that the mirror was not bound by physics. It had its own space, its own rules, and she was dangerously near crossing them. By the third night, Lena's anxiety had transformed into obsession. She could not stop watching the mirror, her eyes drawn to it even when she tried to focus on books, music, or mundane household tasks. The reflections outside of her apartment had grown bolder, the whispers louder, clearer. "You cannot leave. Stay. Step through." Something was waiting on the other side, a presence, an awareness, perhaps even a hunger. Lena could feel it pressing against her perception, testing her, measuring her willpower. The mirror had begun to claim a portion of her consciousness, threading its existence into her thoughts, dreams, and fears. When she dared glance at her reflection again, it smiled, a slow, deliberate, chilling smile that did not match her own. Lena froze, unable to look away. In that instant, she understood that ignoring it was impossible. The mirror had no desire for passive observation. It wanted interaction, control, and perhaps even a replacement. Her reflection stepped closer, closer still, and the whispered command became unmistakable. "Step through. Become one." Lena's chest tightened, her mind struggling between flight and fascination. She felt the pull, subtle but insistent, as if the glass itself had weight and gravity, tugging at her, urging her closer. The days blurred together. Lena no longer noticed sunlight or the routine sounds of the building. Her focus was entirely on the mirror. She tried to avoid it, but it had already woven itself into her life. Even when she turned away, its influence followed, visible in fleeting shadows across the walls or in reflections elsewhere. Apartment windows, the gleaming tiles in the bathroom, the elevator doors. Every surface seemed to carry a fragment of the mirror's otherworldly reality, a subtle distortion meant to remind her that it was always watching. One evening, Lena noticed movement in the reflection that did not correspond to any of her actions. A shadowy figure stepped from behind her, her own mirrored self, but altered. Its face was subtly elongated, eyes unervingly bright, and its movements fluid yet deliberate. It mimicked her breathing, yet it was just a fraction behind, a heartbeat off, creating an uncanny rhythm she could feel more than see. Panic clawed at her chest. She wanted to turn away to break her gaze, but something compelled her to keep watching, a mixture of fear and a dangerous fascination. The mirror seemed to pulse in response to her attention. Walls subtly shifted in its reflection, doors appeared where none existed, and the shadows of objects stretched toward her as if seeking to merge with her. Lena began to hear whispers more clearly now, indecipherable at first, fragments of sentences. Closer, join us, your reflection waits. She pressed her palms to her temples, trying to silence the words, but they lingered, echoing in her mind. Sleep became fragmented, nightmares bleeding into waking moments, each reflection a reminder that she was being observed, measured, tested. She tried to leave the apartment, to seek refuge in the mundane world beyond the building. But the elevator stalled, the stairwell's light flickered, and the usual exit doors felt impossibly far, as if the apartment itself resisted her departure. The mirror had expanded its influence beyond its frame. It had begun to shape reality, bending the space to its will. Lena felt trapped, yet paradoxically, the mirror invited her. In dreams, the mirrored world became a landscape she could walk in, a distorted version of her own apartment where the shadows moved independently, waiting for her to cross the boundary. The reflection in the mirror became increasingly insistent. It stepped closer, no longer a passive copy but an autonomous entity, leaning forward as if it could breach the glass. Lena's reflection extended a hand, slow, deliberate, fingers curling slightly, as though to invite her into its realm. Her own hands trembled, drawn toward the glass despite the pounding in her chest, despite the rational voice screaming that this was dangerous. The mirrored space seemed to pulse, alive with a strange, almost liquid energy, warping and twisting the familiar furniture into alien shapes. By the fourth night, Lena could no longer distinguish her own movements from those of her reflection. Every step, every gesture carried a delayed echo in the mirror, but now some movements in the reflection were independent. Gestures that Lena did not make, expressions she did not feel. A chilling realization hit her. The mirror could create duplicates, partial yet disturbingly real. It tested her, studied her reactions, and seemed to grow stronger with each moment she engaged with it. The whispers became a song of temptation and dread, promising knowledge, power, and yet a loss of self. Late one night, she found herself staring into the mirror as it began to shimmer faintly, the surface almost liquid. Shapes twisted within it, forming grotesque approximations of herself and the apartment. A low, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls, through the floor, through her very bones. Lena's breath caught as she realized the mirror was no longer just an observer. It sought participation, demanded acknowledgement, and perhaps even a replacement. The final whisper, clear and urgent, resonated directly in her mind. Step through, be one with us. Her pulse raced. Lena stepped back instinctively, yet a part of her longed to move closer, to see what lay beyond. The mirror waited, patient, unblinking, alive. She understood then that the choice was no longer hers alone. Refusal or surrender, the mirror would claim her either way. Shadows within the reflection writhed and beckoned, the air thick with a silent threat, a challenge that promised terror, understanding, and transformation. The night had fallen heavy and silent, pressing against the windows of apartment 13. Lena stood before the mirror, the air thick with an almost tangible tension. Her reflection no longer mirrored her exactly, it leaned closer than reality would allow, movements fluid and deliberate. The whispering had escalated into coherent sentences, urgent and commanding. Step through, join us, it's time. The words echoed in her skull, vibrating with a resonance that made her entire body ache. A strange energy radiated from the glass. The surface rippled like liquid silver, drawing Lena in, reflecting not only her image but a world behind it. Familiar yet distorted, walls slanted, light fractured into unnatural angles. Shadows moved independently within this other apartment, gesturing, beckoning. Her reflection raised an arm again, an invitation, and Lena felt an irresistible pull. Fear and fascination intertwined, clawing at her rational mind, pushing her toward the impossible. She tried to retreat, but the apartment seemed to conspire against her. The door rattled, the lights flickered violently, and the shadows stretched outward from the mirror toward her, thin tendrils of darkness that brushed against her skin. Panic surged, yet curiosity compelled her forward. The whispers became a chorus, overlapping, urgent. "We have waited. Come, be with us." Lena's hands trembled as she reached for the glass, almost instinctively, drawn to it by a force she could neither name nor resist. Suddenly the mirror surface shifted entirely. It was no longer a simple reflection but a portal, liquid and dark, inviting her gaze into the twisted, distorted apartment on the other side. Lena could see countless versions of herself, each trapped in various states of fear, fascination, and torment. They were echoes, fragments captured by the mirror, and in their silent screams she understood her fate. The mirror consumed those who looked too closely, claiming a part of their essence. Yet its power did not feel malicious. It was patient, deliberate, eternal. Lena stepped closer, almost entranced. Her heartbeat thundered as the mirrored world expanded before her eyes. The whispers intensified, layering themselves into a symphony of insistence. Figures moved in the other apartment, shadowed versions of herself, gesturing with pleading hands. She could see the outlines of her former life, furniture, personal objects, moments she had once cherished, but twisted, warped, and held in eternal stillness. The mirror promised knowledge, understanding, and a connection deeper than reality itself, yet at the cost of becoming part of its world. Her reflection's face twisted into an expression she did not feel, a mixture of anticipation, hunger, and longing. The mirrored Lena raised a hand and touched the surface from the other side. At that precise moment, Lena felt an unnatural pull, a tug in her chest and soul, as if the mirrors will reach through the glass, demanding union. Shadows began to crawl from the corners of her apartment toward her, coiling like living smoke. The pull was relentless, impossible to resist, and her mind teetered on the edge of surrender. For a brief moment she tried to scream, to resist, but the sound caught in her throat. Her body felt weightless, every muscle strained by the magnetic force emanating from the mirror. The whispered commands now became a single unified voice. "Step through, it is time, become one with us." Lena's vision blurred as the boundaries of reality and reflection warped, the edges of her apartment dissolving into the liquid darkness of the mirror. The pull was irresistible, inescapable, and for an instant, Lena understood the fate of those who had come before her. She was about to join the chorus of trapped selves, lost in the mirror's eternal realm. The glass surface rippled violently, distorting the apartment and twisting Lena's surroundings into a landscape of shadows and echoes. Every object, every corner, seemed to stretch toward the mirror, merging reality with the liquid darkness within. Her pulse pounded as she realized she was no longer merely observing. It was as if the mirror had begun to rewrite her own perception, bending her senses to its will. Each heartbeat echoed with the whispers, "Step through, belong, forever." Lena's feet moved forward almost involuntarily. Her hands brushed the surface, cold and liquid, yet solid enough to feel as if it might swallow her whole. She tried to pull back, but the apartment itself resisted, walls bending subtly to guide her toward the mirror. Shadows from the reflection slithered into the real world, brushing against her ankles, wrapping around her legs with a chilling grip. Panic and fascination warred within her, but the mirror's allure was irresistible. She felt herself being pulled across the threshold, her reflection smiling knowingly, waiting to welcome her fully into its domain. A flash of clarity struck. The mirror did not kill, it claimed. It did not destroy, it transformed. Those who entered became part of its endless chorus, fragments of consciousness trapped in a suspended reality where time and identity dissolved. Lena realized that stepping through meant surrendering entirely, her existence folding into the mirror's collective memory. Yet the fear was countered by curiosity, by the tantalizing promise of understanding the true nature of this mirrored realm. She hesitated, caught between survival and discovery, the mirror shimmering like liquid night, beckoning. Suddenly, a hand appeared behind her shoulder, startling her into a complete freeze. Lena spun, expecting an intruder, but the apartment was empty. Only the mirror reflected the truth, a figure behind her reflection, herself yet not. This doubled Lena mirrored her hesitation perfectly, as if the mirror had split her into observer and participant simultaneously. The whispers grew urgent. Choose, become one, do not resist. Lena's chest heaved. The air itself seemed to thrum with pressure, a force pulling not only at her body but at her very consciousness. Desperately she stepped backward. The apartment snapped back into its ordinary shape, walls straightening, shadows retreating. Yet when she looked at the mirror, the other Lena remained, smiling knowingly, eyes bright with unnatural intelligence. It was waiting, patient. The whispers had faded, but a lingering resonance remained in her mind, a subtle thrum that reminded her she had been chosen, observed, tested. The mirror had not let her go, not fully. A tether had been established, fragile yet unbreakable. Over the following days, Lena lived with the silent presence of that other self. The mirror remained in its corner, ordinary yet undeniably potent. Sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep she would catch a flicker, movement in the reflection, a hint of a smile, or a shadow that lingered too long. She understood now that the mirror would wait, patient and eternal, until the moment was right. And when it called again, it would not be a whisper. It would be impossible to resist. Lena's life became a delicate balance between ordinary existence and constant awareness. The mirror no longer beckoned openly, but the sensation of being observed persisted. Every reflection in every surface reminded her that part of her now belonged to the mirrored world, her consciousness subtly entwined with the entity that had waited patiently in apartment 13. She could never forget. The mirror was alive, and one day she, or someone else, would step through, completing the circle. Even now, as she moved about her day, Lena felt the pull in quiet moments. In windows of passing cars, in glass panes of neighboring apartments, in the faint sheen of polished furniture, she glimpsed the reflection waiting. The mirror's presence endured, patient, eternal, and hungry for the next soul that dared to look too closely.